Sometimes we all see eye to eye. Sometimes things got a little bit heated.
What up, everyone? Shaq here for Cage Side Seats, and you know who this is. She's everywhere from MLW to Ambi. Peasants bow down and kings beware. It's the interview queen, Alicia Atout. How are you?
Hello. What a lovely intro. I'm doing so well. I'm so excited about everything on the horizon. So thank you very much for having me on to talk about it.
And thank you for making the time today. It's super exciting because, funny enough, I was just not like a week ago talking to one of my colleagues, like, we really need some sort of media roundtable in the pro wrestling space. And I look for it and I can't find it. And lo and behold, do I find out that you will be hosting a new weekly roundtable segment called MLW Embedded that covers all the pro wrestling landscape, not just the great stuff that's going on in Major League Wrestling. Can you tell me a little bit about how this came together, if we have a release date in mind, and just everything about how the format's going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm absolutely psyched about this new project and this new show. It will actually be airing during Fightland in the middle of the show. It's a roundtable, very open in terms of everything that we cover. Nothing is off limits. No other brands are off limits, and no other company is doing something quite like this. When it comes to the actual roundtable itself, I will be hosting, but we're also going to be joined by some of the hottest journalists within wrestling. So we have everyone from Dave Meltzer, we have Wrestling Inc.'s Raj Giri, Sporting News' Andreas Hale, and then Wrestle Rab's Emilio Sparks. So honestly, it is a stacked panel, really some of the who's who when it comes to journalists and analysts in the business, and they're all lovely people. So when it comes to being able to chat, everyone has their own opinion on things. Sometimes we all see eye to eye. Sometimes things got a little bit heated on the panel, and that's kind of the beauty of it. It's unfiltered. We say what we want to say, and we share our opinions on everything. So as I mentioned, it will be debuting during Fightland, which is Vice TV's very first actual wrestling event, and that's just I'm so excited about that. In general, the show was stacked, so yeah, everything in terms of Embedded, we just go completely unfiltered and talk about everything going on in the wrestling world. And I really do feel like, as you mentioned, there's nothing like this out there at the moment, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And the fact MLW is the people behind it, even more excited.
Even better. What was it? How many text messages did you get? How many text messages did you get from friends and family when they spotted you on that Vice commercial?
It was ridiculous. Yesterday, especially because they started airing it a lot more over the last few days, my phone was blowing up, and I just thought, oh my gosh, it's amazing how many people watch Vice. 'Cause I remember watching documentaries, a bunch of those types of shows growing up on it. So especially a lot of my American friends are really, really excited about it. And when Court sent me that final video, which was going to be the commercial, just seeing myself in there between our world champ and Fatu and then Hammerstone, it was just so exciting. So yeah, it's going to be a huge event. I can't wait.
I love it. It's been really cool watching everything that's come from Alicia, Ambi, and beyond, from getting your start at 17 in Toronto, and it just making this huge transition. What's it been like? Obviously, you're still doing a ton of interviews. You can go check those out on Ambi all the time. But what's it been like for you over these last few years, making the transition in a sense from doing interviews in a more journalism sense to now also being an on-camera personality?
It's been wild and completely unexpected, because when I first started this whole journey when I was 17, like you mentioned, I just wanted to interview bands to get free concert tickets and like meet my idols, and then it went from
perks,
people. Yeah, and then people started actually watching things, and it got to the point where that started to get really big. And speaking with my dad, who was also my manager at the time, and he said, why don't you start interviewing wrestlers? You love wrestling and you've been watching it since you were a kid. So again, it was never the game plan to get into this crazy world, but now I'm here. And it was a unique transition, because in my interviews, this is me. I'm just myself. I'm very open, I'm very blunt, and I say what's on my mind, but I think they're really conversational and open. Meanwhile, when it comes to promos, you do have a couple things to put across, but the beauty with MLW is they just let me be myself, but kind of like we spinal tap it and crank that to 11. So you can have a little more attitude, you can have a lot more fun with it, and I love it. Like, I absolutely love it, whether I'm on screen with someone I adore, on screen with someone I might not see eye to eye with, where there are a couple. It's just a good time, and the freedom they give me in terms of all right, this is what we'd like to put across, but you can put your input in. Let's wing this. Let's see what happens. I'm so grateful for that because I never wanted to be with a brand who would ever restrict me, and they don't. So yeah, it was a weirdly seamless transition. Definitely had to learn a couple things, but I'm very happy that I took it up.
Well, I love how you mentioned, how you were doing a lot of music interviews, and your dad said, "Hey, why not give wrestling a shot?" Because I think maybe sometimes from the outside in, there's this impression of wrestling fans that they're just wrestling fans. But some of the people you mentioned, Andreas Hale, man, he's got Kendrick Lamar and excuse me, it's been a very early morning. Absol and J Rock stories for days. Yourself, you've talked to everyone from Blink 182 to Dua Lipa, and even I find myself when I'm doing stuff for Entertainment Tonight Canada, it's always the pro wrestling stuff that's really blowing up. When did you notice, in terms of your YouTube channel, that there was this avenue for pro wrestling that could be more than just a side hustle?
So I was interviewing a lot of musicians here in Toronto, and they'd come through town, and we'd just be talking about music, the Jill kind of putting that stuff over. And then they'd start making wrestling references, whether it was a Stone Cold what, or they'd start talking like Macho Man, and they would think it would go over my head, and by no means in a rude way, but they just thought like, hey, it's an inside joke. But I'd start to pick up on it, and then they'd realize, oh, she likes wrestling, and our whole interview would 180 from music to wrestling. And that really opened my eyes, thinking, oh my gosh, of course musicians love wrestling. I love it. And then it really just all went from there, that I started posting those first initial interviews. I was worrisome because I thought, oh, are my music fans going to start to wonder, what is she doing? But people just loved it. So now it's that balance of music and wrestling, my two biggest passions, and I haven't looked back.
Have you noticed over the years, because I had this talk with CM Punk recently, I feel like in the 80s and 90s, the relationship between Hollywood and pro wrestling was kind of superficial. Like, you'd see these big crossovers, but pro wrestling was always kind of that, like, ugly redheaded stepchild. And now with stuff like, nothing, not that there's anything wrong with stepchildren or red hair.
Or redheads.
But when you have shows like Glow and shows like Heels, I feel like you're really scratching beyond the surface. Do you get the sense over the past few years that like mainstream media is starting to really welcome pro wrestling as more than just like a freak show?
100%. And I feel like because now we do show more of the behind the scenes, a lot of people understand this is a sport. People really are putting bodies on the line. I got in the ring recently and it's no joke. Like I'm still covered in just bruises, like we can't see it. Oh, there we go. But like they've healed quite a bit, but I was covered, and it's not a joke when you're out there doing this stuff. So I think now that people kind of have that different look and perspective, they're realizing we should take this seriously. And if I don't like it, then I don't like it. If I love it, then awesome, let's celebrate it. But seeing those shows you mentioned and just seeing companies getting picked up on channels like for MLW and Vice, and just even Dark Side of the Ring now being a huge worldwide spectacle, it's so exciting because that only further opens doors for even bigger things. And I don't know, it's another form of entertainment. I have never thought it being any different than going to the opera or sports game. Like it's always just been there for me. So I think it's amazing, and it's only going to make things even better in the future for opportunity.
Agreed. And for anyone doubting the legitimacy of pro wrestling, go watch our colleague Chris Van Vliet get chopped to hell by Sean Spears, or almost break his
That
neck
was
getting
brutal.
DDT'd by Gangrel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any fun memories working with one of our other fellow Canadians, Anthony Corelli, on Behind the Lights? Because obviously he's a fan favorite. For those who don't recognize the name, of course, that's Santino or Santino Marella. What are your favorite times working with him behind the scenes? Because he just seems like
Oh
such a
my gosh.
character.
He's ridiculous, but in the best of ways. And for me, it was always so surreal getting texts from him or walking into the studio and seeing him there, because he was one of my absolute favorites as a kid, like hands down. So, like both versions of him too would always crack me up. And he's just as funny in character as he is in person, 100%. So there's this thing where every single time he sends a text, whether to his wife or his kids or work, he uses speech to text every single time. So he'd be sending things, and then I think I had an iPhone, so Siri would say things back and it would always be botched. And this happened every single day we filmed. So it was just this little ongoing joke we had for months and months. We're like, why don't you just text it? You're gonna have to fix it all anyway. So that was always kind of like a super funny thing that we had. And otherwise, it was just, he loved making fun of me. I felt like I was one of his like nieces or something. So he'd always crack jokes and make fun of what I wore and everything. And it was always just a good time. Like I had such a blast working with him. He's as I said, he's ridiculous.
I thought Siri is supposed to like get better at picking up your speech over time, but apparently he's
No.
the exception there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it rarely works. And I just remember looking at him sitting in the seat beside, just sit, why do you keep trying? Just give up. Just give up, Anthony.
You did make an appearance at AEW, the inaugural Double or Nothing event. I actually mentioned this to I asked Chris this recently for him because he also appeared at that event. But were there any plans for you long term to continue working with AEW, or was that a one off?
So I had done All In and then Double or Nothing, the first two events, and everything seemed like, I thought there was interest, and then at some point things went a little cold, and then I had interest coming in from other companies and brands, and it just got to the point where, yes, of course, anyone who signs there, like it's a great opportunity, but then other things started coming my way, and I was at a crossroads where it's, do you wait for who knows how long, or do you kind of just grab life by the horns and go for
Mm-hmm.
it? So I ended up doing a couple of other things, other collaborations. And then shortly after, MLW reached out. And as soon as I got into that locker room, it just felt right. I've been in many locker rooms in the past, and this is the only one I've ever felt completely comfortable in, like just 100%. So yeah, it's one of those things where I'll always be thankful to the Bucks and Cody for those opportunities, and I'll still text Cody to this day whenever something cool happens to him or Brandy. But I'm happy with how everything did work out. So
I think there's a really important lesson there. So let's drop some knowledge on people in the industry who are maybe at that crossroads or looking for stuff. How do you make that judgment call of like, at the surface is a great opportunity here, but look at all these other things that maybe less traditional, but are really speaking to me. Like, is that for you do you trust your intuition, or how do you sort of parse through that?
it's a big gut intuition thing. And especially after some things that happened in my life over the last couple of years, I've always realized just go with your gut. And if something at all feels a little off, or, if it got to a point too with certain other companies where if someone is waiting for that long, it always feels good to
Mm-hmm.
feel wanted and know your value and your worth in any aspect of life, really, as cheesy as that sounds. So when MLW came around and they were just so hungry and they were shocked I wasn't signed anywhere else, it just, like I said, it just felt right. And then I remember walking into that first New York show and just seeing so many friends in there, thinking, wow, this could be happening every single month. This
Mm-hmm.
is this is awesome. So yeah,
Amazing.
it was just a complete gut thing, and I just am happy I went with it.
You launched, I think, about a month ago now, your Only Frenemies, OnlyFans with Salina De La
Yes.
Renta. What have you learned from that process a month in now? Because I think a lot of times I have a lot of women who are like, oh, in my life are like, OnlyFans, let's do it, let's do it. But there's a lot more work to it than I think some people expect on the surface. What have you learned from that process a month in?
It's interesting because when we first started everything and we realized people really love how much we don't like each other, we had to put our differences aside and think, okay, I mean, some days she does like me and other days she can't stand me, and then vice versa. So we thought, how do we really bring this onto a bigger stage? Now we're going to go with Patreon because OnlyFans does have a very interesting stigma. However, we went out there, we were very honest, and we said there's going to be no nude or lewd content. It's going to be us just being dummies and posting what we want. And it's worked perfectly. So we've really found a way to use that platform to our advantage. And it's been everything from photo shoots to wrestling matches, as I kind of mentioned prior, getting beat up a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just been eye opening. And it also showed us how much of a want there is for something like this. There are companies doing feuds between interviewer and wrestler, but not to this extent where it's every single day putting out content this way. So it's something where we realize there's a business here, and
Mm-hmm.
we just have to put everything aside and run with it. But it's been very eye opening. And the one thing I do have to give her credit for, she does see very eye to eye in terms of being a businesswoman, but also just she's really showed me how to just be unapologetically myself, which is something where before I
Amazing.
think, oh, I'm doing this. This is too goofy. This is too ridiculous. And that's helped me in interviews and promos and stuff like this, where I'm just,
Yeah.
okay, I'm me. Let's just own it and you can take it or leave it. So I do have to say one nice thing about her, but the rest will be awful, I promise.
I was gonna say, for anyone who's having trouble with that friend or that enemy, look to Alicia and Selena for inspiration. You could make money out of it.
For real.
Since you brought it up, because I know you do have a Patreon as well, what are sort of the advantages of going with OnlyFans over Patreon or vice versa?
Yes. So OnlyFans, you can actually run live pay-per-views unlike Patreon. So we had a wrestling
Mm.
pay-per-view which aired. We went all out in terms of gear, entrances, everything. It was wild. So you can do that aspect. You can also do certain things when it comes to messages where you can send us the same message to every person, and then they have to kind of unlock certain things as you go along.
Cool.
And they're just a lot more little just little features that you can use and utilize. So that was the reason we ended up going with that one. And anyone who's kind of bringing up the stigma of it or whatever, we say, hey, subscribe, and you'll see like we're being completely honest in terms of what we're posting. It's exactly what we said it's going to be. So if people want to view it a certain way, they can. But at the same time, we are overjoyed with how it's working out.
Last question here. You did one of our fellow Canadians quite dirty. You brought the walking weapon, Josh Alexander, to his knees with what I think is my favorite interview question of all time. And I might have to co-opt it, but I'll give you credit each and every time. You asked him what his childhood wrestling gimmick and name was. And I took it one step farther with him, but I think it's time to get some vengeance. So, Alicia, I want to know, what was your childhood wrestling name and finishing move, if you had any?
Ooh, okay. Well, growing up, I was a huge fan of a bunch of emo music. So my friends would always call me Paradiddle because I'd always be like sitting in class drumming along to Paramore. So I feel like if I going back to like little emo Alicia, it would definitely have to be Paradiddle. And I feel like I'd have to come out with some sort of drumsticks or something and do a crazy finisher on the person and then just like beat them over the head with sticks, which is kind of violent, but whatever. It's wrestling.
Well, we'll need the GCW crossover, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Cage or something like that.
I love it.
Alicia, I want to thank you so much for the time today. Before I let you go, please blast the socials, blast the link trees, anything you got going on. Please let the people know.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys are interested, whether you knew me before or you're just discovering things now, please feel free to search Alicia Atout, Atout, in your Google boxes. There you'll find all of my socials, my YouTube channel, my interviews, my Patreon, the OnlyFans along with Salina De La Renta. And of course, you must tune in to Major League Wrestling. Every single Wednesday, we air new episodes up on our YouTube channel, but we also have a huge event being Fightland coming your way Thursday, October 7th at 10 p.m. on Vice TV. Things are wild right now, so definitely check that out. You can hit up MLW.com as well for merchandise along with upcoming events. It's about to be a crazy, crazy time, so buckle up.
MLW, give this woman a raise. Alicia, thank you so much for the time. Guys, subscribe, notification bell, like button, all of that. Thank you to Cage Side Seats as always for empowering us. Take care until next time, and keep your eyes out for MLW Embedded every week.
Bye.